right, Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, and I say this every time because it's absolutely true, looks at geopolitics more and in the round. Very few shows, podcasts, whatever you want to call it, actually do that. Now, we do that because this is the thing that affects you, me, and practically everybody in the world. It's the way that the different parts of the world, different countries, different peoples, different classes, how they all sort of rub together like tectonic plates. And at some level, the people at the top try to control how those plates rub together. And this is what we talk about. We talk about who says what is the fact or are the facts, and why it tends to be the case that many of us at the lower level never really challenge that. Now, you're going to hear a croak in my voice. I've got a bit of a cold, so it's coming through. And I know that my podcast's wife has that same croak in her voice. And my mistress, I'm not so sure if she has or she hasn't, because I haven't seen her recently. Sorry about that, mistress. Dr. Rachel, how are you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't really know how to, what to say after that introduction. But no, I haven't got a croak in my voice. But we have had a series of viruses in this house. So, yeah, I think I'm on the latter end of it. But as you know, I have all the answers when it comes to being ill. So, yeah, I've just treated everybody well and we're no longer the house of plague.
Super duper. That's what I like to hear. And obviously, I better bring in my podcast wife before she gets jealous, because in these menage a trois, you've always got to sort of make it just right. You can't put too much emphasis on one person and not the other, which is like geopolitics in the round.
You've got to keep us all sweet, haven't you? You've got to keep us.
Well, you put it that way. That's so
and I'll tell you, when it's good to be back, because I feel like you've ignored us for a few weeks, Carlton.
This is true, and it wasn't done on purpose.
No, I know, but listeners do. I mean, I think at very least we get sad face emojis from listeners when we're not present, and at worst, I think it could result in full on meltdown.
Sorry.
However, I'm really excited today because we actually have a fourth person in the room. So
yes, we do.
It's all about the sharing. I'm going to preface this to say, and I know I've mentioned this before, but when we first started podcasting in this way, someone who knows a lot about podcasts told us a few basic rules. One being never have more than 2 people on the chat. Another one being never have an episode that's over 29 minutes long. And I'm really proud of the fact that we regularly, in fact, that we continue to break those rules all the time. So because of that, we're now pushing the envelope a little bit further with this foursome. Our guest today is somebody that I know this is going to work with, because I find his opinions very interesting, and I think it's going to be a really great addition to our conversation. His name's Sean Hawie, and what he's coming on to talk to us about isn't actually what he does as his day job. We might touch on that further down the line, but one of the most interesting things that he said to me a few weeks ago is he said, "I'm on my third midlife crisis." And he talked me through some of the really exciting things that he's actually doing. I mean, his midlife crises all sound super fun, to be completely honest. And then second interesting thing that he said to me is that he kept a diary throughout his school years. So he went to private schools and he kept a diary, and he said to me that he would be really keen to look at opportunities to publish this diary. I've heard some excerpts from it. It does seem very interesting, very funny. It talks about his public school life. It's actually quite positive and uplifting, because really the underlying narrative is unrequited love for a particular girl called Rebecca. But when we spoke about it, and we spoke about his experiences at public school and his experience, his lived experience of his friends and work acquaintances, and the way that the public school system sort of treated them, and the way that they kind of come out on the other end. The third really fascinating insight that Sean gave me, which I started to think about, and that's, I guess, why we're all here, was that the experience of public school affects people, and especially men, in a way that affects their decision making later in life, and can often lead to a neurodiverse diagnosis. This is really topical because Nikki Campbell, whom we know has kind of spearheaded this campaign, taking Edinburgh Academy to court over bullying, abuse, both physical and sexual, at Edinburgh Academy over decades, has now said that he's realised now that he has ADHD. Also in the press at the moment, Charles Spencer, who's Diana's younger brother, has also released his book, which is called A Very Private School. And again, he talks about Madewell School and his ongoing abuse in great graphic detail. And again, he says that he said in an interview in the Times that he's bored many therapists over the years, and then suddenly the penny dropped and he realised that it all kind of linked back to school. So, as always, Dr. Rachel will be peppering our conversation with fascinating insights about why all of this happens. But without further ado, I will finally hand over to Sean to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Fergus, for that introduction. I don't want to talk too much about what I do because it's a little bit boring. I'm in software. I did just successfully exit my first startup, so it's been a bit of a wild start to the year. But, you know, I'm still working. I'm still onwards and upwards on my next project. But yeah, I suppose I am going through my third life crisis, midlife crisis. This one is gymnastics. I tend to take up things that I feel are just polar opposites to what I do in my day job. I think I've been working in the fintech or tech field or e-commerce field for about 20 years now, since I left school and graduated. You know, in my late 20s, I took up acting. I quit my job and I got a diploma in acting. I tread the boards at various theatres and above pubs in northwest London. I had a great time, to be honest. I was about as broke as I'll ever be. I had very long hair, but I was incredibly grounded. There was something about not spending 8 hours a day looking at a screen that made me very grounded. Just talking with people is very healthy. Who'd have known? My second midlife crisis, what was that one? Oh yeah, I started Cosplay London. So for those of you who don't know, cosplay is this hobby where you dress up as superheroes or characters from your favorite manga or anime comics or computer game films or TV series. You've probably seen young people dressing up as characters from Harry Potter or various other characters. I got into that. I don't know why, slightly embarrassed about it. But I also started a community called Cosplay London, which turned out to be the largest cosplay community in the UK. And we met up quite a lot. And then we went to conventions together. And I think very quickly I realized it wasn't really my bag. I was just very intrigued from a technical perspective as to how people made various costumes for cinema, costume design, that kind of thing. And I really got into a little bit of building costumes myself. I was a midnight seamstress. The funniest part of that was being stopped on the underground by the British Transport Police because I had a costume on which had a lot of electronics on it, and they were very concerned about the safety of my fellow passengers. But eventually I was saved by a station guard who came along and told the police not to worry, that he knew exactly where I was going to. There was a huge convention in London Excel Centre with a bunch of similarly minded nerds like myself. So that was my second one. And yeah, my third one, I've started gymnastics about 6 months ago. Never did gymnastics in my life. I'm in reasonably good shape. I'm 41 years old. And yeah, I'm really excited. I do it twice a week now, and I can do a somersault. So, you know, I can die a happy man, I suppose.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Carlton, have you ever encountered a terrorist dressed as a superhero?
As a superhero? No, I haven't. Never had that pleasure.
Would you have presented a serious threat?
He may well have, you know, because, you know, one has to say that more in terms of the protection field, it is, let us say, certain people who are unconventional who may well wish to do certain people harm. So it's not abnormal, no.
All right, so look, let me just circle back to the public school experience and what we make of all of this. Shall we start with Nicky Campbell, because what he's done and what he's achieved is quite remarkable. But I can't think of anybody else or any other. I can't think of anybody else historically who's been quite so open and honest about all of this, and also somebody who's actually somebody who's presented such a lot of evidence and brought together so many witnesses in order for the terrible story to go to court, and you know, to then get to the point where not only his school was sort of publicly apologising, but lots of other high-profile public schools were also kind of retrospectively apologising. And now he's sort of talking about his mental health and his neurodiversity, which he feels was caused by all of this. What do you think, Dr. Rachel?
Well, I think it's really interesting because obviously neurodiversity is something that I'm very passionate about. You know, it's one of my core areas of research. And I think it's really important that people understand there's quite a lot of crossovers between certain behaviours and symptoms associated with neurodiversity and actually trauma, particularly complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's, you know, for me, when you're looking at sort of the formative years, the sort of with brain development, we rely so much on experiences, and particular with relationships that we have with other people, to form our impressions of the world. Now, most of our blueprints, we call them schemas, are actually laid down in the brain before we're 18 months old. So it very much depends on our relationships with our primary carers. But then as we go through life, we're obviously open to other experiences with other people. And often when we are subjected to repeated behavioural patterns, it becomes extremely normalised, and we develop coping mechanisms and coping strategies and sort of brain functionality based on what is habitual and normalised to us, even though it perhaps isn't how we would expect human behaviour to be. And I just want to sort of point out to everybody now that just because something is common, so a lot of people are experiencing it, doesn't mean to say that this is normal, and we should never normalise that kind of behaviour. So, you know, I know that from my perspective as a neuroscientist, you know, taking aside sort of public school experiences, these abuses of power actually are extremely prevalent in all institutions within, you know, certainly our country, you know, if not, you know, from a global perspective. So, you know, it's very much for me, we see people who are presenting and, you know, having sort of diagnoses in particularly neurodiverse conditions, and actually, you know, for me, we are dealing with people who are extremely distressed and who have been through extremely complex experiences throughout their childhood. And you know, it seems to me, you know, because taking it to Sean's account, no, I'm not sure that 41 is midlife crisis, you know, because I think it's a bit older to have a midlife crisis, and interesting that you're on your third. It seems to, you know, it seems to me that we seem to have patterns of what people are being diagnosed with. You know, we have, like, you know, whatever is popular, and I, you know, part of my messaging and my research and how I work with people is to sort of move away from the labeling and actually start treating people as human beings, not conditions, and helping them to actually become the best version of themselves by understanding how what happened to them has had an impact on how their brain then functions. You sort of the central nervous system is in its entirety. So, you know, I think it's very good what, you know, particularly what Nikki Campbell's doing, but I also think that there's been other people, you know, in the recent past who have come forward and who also have been treated as bad and also have added to his story and the sort of a trend in, you know, in particular how children have been treated by adults in our society.
Yeah, let me just jump in on that one, because first and foremost, what I want to make clear to the audience, which is not solely in the United Kingdom, is that a public school is the opposite to what it sounds. So for the rest of the world, a public school will mean somewhere that the state looks after and the state takes you there, and it's the regular school. In the United Kingdom, the public school is the school where the elites tend to go to. They are fee paying, albeit in some extent they're subsidised by the state through charitable donations, I guess you can argue, from the state itself, which is a big political question here. But basically, if you, obviously previously, a little bit less now, but if you wanted to get on, you would send your child to a public school, Eton, Harrow, etc., Rugby, etc., because that would be the first step into you becoming somewhat powerful within the British state, and obviously if you go further back, within the British Empire, because the empire was basically run by individuals who went to public schools. So we're talking about the elite here when we talk about these schools, not to be confused with other people who have suffered sexual problems, because that's what Nikki Campbell's relating it to, about being sexual abuse, etc., that come from other schools of the absolute opposite. The Belfast school example, whereby they sent orphans to and they were being abused. So what I would say is, from my perspective, the secret intelligence and national security world, this issue of abuse in both public schools and in the lower echelon schools, be they approved or just general schools where people without any parents, orphanages or whatever, have been abused, is writ large. And it's writ large because what happens is that people in intelligence services from other states seek out information about this and then utilize it in the past to control individuals as their agents, example. So there's a whole big issue around this. It's not just confined. And I think what Nicky Campbell's done, he's looked at one angle, but there is a much bigger angle. There was, in fact, quite a big operation done by the Met, which ended because they said that the individual who had said that various things had happened to him and many others in his school, and it was the lower end, not the public school, that he had made them up. And indeed, that individual, I'm not going to give any names or anything like that, but you can look it up, that individual was then in the end sent to prison. Now, it was taken extremely seriously by the CID in the Met because this guy seemed to have information and knowledge about what had gone on. Now, all I will say is that maybe he did or did not, but these things have happened en masse in public schools, which is now being attuned to by the various books that are coming out. And so my question of Sean is, are people in such schools aware of this kind of track record? And how does that manifest itself in the school environment?
Yes, so my experience was that most of the time the children didn't know too much about the likelihood that it may be, let's say it might be more likely that things might happen in that type of a school. There is an awareness that you are in a privileged institution. There's an awareness that it's obviously very high pressure. You are reminded quite often of the people around you who've achieved great things, whether it's a former prime minister or a general or even an actor who's gone to your school. So there's this pressure that's implicit there. I wouldn't say that the children are aware that of how, I suppose the word is dangerous, an environment it can be. You aren't able to go home at the end of the day and speak to your parents. You aren't able to hug your mother or your father. We know now, and Rachel could probably talk more about this, how important touch therapy is. It's interesting to explore what kind of touch is available to pupils when they don't have the facility to go home and just hug their parents, I suppose. I don't think that they are really too aware of it. There's too much going on. It's a very high pressure environment. That's really all I can say on that question.
Well, listen, I'll jump in. I'm just going to jump in here to Carlton's earlier point. This is a really interesting dichotomy because, children from disadvantaged backgrounds sort of, are disproportionately, ending up in prison or in sort of, the welfare, being supported by the welfare state, as it were. But as you mentioned, children who may have gone through torture and bullying and sexual abuse might very likely now be running the country, and so the impact of policy making on those formative years is, I'm sure Dr. Rachel's got reams to talk about on this, not least because, we know her opinion on the current the current Prime Minister. But the touch thing is also very interesting because, I think just to clarify for listeners, both Nicky Campbell and Charles Spencer and lots of other orators who have spoken out about this are talking very graphically about sexual abuse. And in the case of the sort of boys' schools, it's very often sort of bare bottom spanking or, genital touching or, encouraging nakedness or as well as the physical abuse. So talking about pushing children down the stairs or picking them up by their ears or bashing them in the head with a cricket bat and stuff like that, right? One of the things in Charles Spencer's book is he talks about the lack of hugs. He talks about the fact that you know, he'd sort of severed the ties with his mum and his sisters, so there was no, you know, and his nanny even. I mean, you know, obviously this is a person of privilege, but no less deserving of human rights, right? And he talks about the fact that he sort of tried to hug a matron, and she ended up molesting him. So again, you've got this just
no. It's worse than that. She purposefully provided that sort of let us say that type of pleasure or that type of comfort to many of the lads. She went out looking for them and providing that to them, because she knew the audience was captive and she was one of few females who could provide that. She was like 30 or whatever the year was, and he said he was about 10. So that's what was going on. So I just needed to add that to it.
No, and
more insidious.
One of the other sort of dichotomies or sort of interesting polarizations I feel is that, you know, that there was an article in the, you know, I think in the Guardian, where Nicky Campbell basically, I mean, I think in a press statement he said that the main perpetrator of the abuse at his school, this guy called Mr. Wares, was worse than Savile or something, right? But if you look at convicted paedophiles and, you know, their level of sort of child pornography, and, you know, that may however they sort of come by their images, whether they're, you know, friending someone on Fortnite and asking them to send naked shots or whatever, right? Versus, you know, if you're bare bottom spanking these children, it's like you've kind of got this pornography on tap, haven't you?
Well, yeah, and there's like a lot of humiliation involved in that as well, you know, for the child. And it's like the really, I suppose it's difficult to choose the right descriptor, but what the interesting thing happens is that because of what is happening, and particularly when we are getting a certain kind of attention and not any sort of positive attention, then the brain sort of changes certain mechanisms where it's like, as long as we're getting some attention, that's better than none at all. So it can cause an extreme distortion of what is acceptable and what isn't. That's what I was sort of talking about before with the normalization. And then, you know, if nobody's challenging that, if nobody's actually saying this is not okay, this is not how human beings interact with each other, then there are certain chemical reactions that are going to go on in the brain, and the brain likes familiar. And this is a really important point with this. The brain likes familiar because it can predict what's going to happen, even if what's happening is, you know, insidious, if it's abusive, if it's just downright nasty. You know, at least the brain knows what's going to happen next. So we're getting a lot of, you know, children who are growing up into adults who actually, in particular with dopamine mechanism, have quite a dysfunctional way of relating to other people. And I suppose, you know, that is something that is worth thinking about, because if we're not getting the right kind of comfort, if we're not getting the right kind of touch, but we're getting some sort of attention to the child, that's better than nothing at all.
Well, this is something that I wanted to look at, and I wanted actually to bring Sean in on it, who hasn't, we should stress, has not suffered this sort of issue. And so what I want Sean to do is to look at the positives and why parents would send their children in terms of the positives of public school, and then we can come back to where we are with the negatives subsequently. But let me just put it this way. When I was, let's say, a 10, 12, 13-year-old, and a matron would have shown me some interest, in my school, we would have said, fantastic. You know, so the question is, where do we perceive this whole issue, and has it been underplayed? Because from the perspective of those looking at it, it might not have been perceived as negative. But this is where we come into how we are now. With the change of times and the change of how we've gone on, maybe this was far, far more widespread than what we actually think it was right now. Now, so we need to look at that issue. Now, nobody would be happy with being flogged on the backside. And as the way that Diana's brother put it, this guy loved it that much that he used to do 5 canes in one direction and the 6th across to make his mark, like the half dozen, and, open the backside up in doing it. So you see, if he has suffered this, which I've no doubt that he has, because nobody's come back saying anything opposite, and others have come to him to say this is what happened, and that headmaster was doing this for ever and a day, it cannot be said that nobody knew about it. And it cannot be said that that was a pleasurable aspect where it might have been hugging the matron. So you've got 2, if you will, versions of the potential horror. One whereby you might think, I've been flogged by this guy, and apparently most boys were flogged regardless of what they'd done. And the second one was, I go to this lady for everything that I need from her. She consoles me. I feel better in myself. Are they both working in tandem in a way? Because they both know that it's happening. They must do. So, Sean, I ask you, did you ever see anything like that in your time, whereby there may have been a fundamental twist, if you will, of pleasure and pain that was directed within the school in itself?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll actually speak to your first point first about the positive. I do think it's important to talk about that in that context. I think, well, first of all, where I start from is I do believe that the vast majority of parents always try to make the right decisions for their children. I think that always has to be said. My experience was unique in that I've been privately educated all my life, but it wasn't always boarding. I went to a private day school in the middle of the city of London for 3 years, and then for some reason or another, which I only found out recently, my parents decided to take me out and to put me into a boarding school, one of the more famous ones, where I studied for 4 years. Now, I joined that boarding school 1 year late, and that had an effect on how I made friends, how I related to everybody else. I did feel like I was a little bit left out when I first joined. I mean, first of all, you had to, those were the days where you shared a room, and I was, I think, 13 maybe. And of course, the way that it is determined who you share a room with is, well, basically, it's, the kids decide who they'd like to share a room with, and when there's an odd number, there's one person left out at the end, and me being the new kid, I was lumped in with literally the most unpopular person in my house. So yeah, that was a bit of a deep end situation. Pair up the new guy who's going to have all sorts of apprehension with the guy who is the least popular and possibly has some issues of his own going on that caused him to be so unpopular in the first place. So yeah, I was thrown in at the deep end. I think I'm quite well placed in that regard to talk about how quickly I went from a day school, albeit still private, to a boarding school. But yeah, parents do their best. I'll say that. But going back to the second half of what you were asking, Rachel can speak more on this, obviously, but I now know a lot of the things I was experiencing back then are, well, first of all, they're normal. A lot of the things that we see happen not just in boarding schools, but they happen in other private schools that are day schools, and they also happen in state schools. I now know that the people who bully are probably people who have been bullied themselves. They are dealing with their own issues. I mean, with boarding school in particular, people are dealing with not being with their parents, as I mentioned earlier. So sometimes the school that I was at anyway was such that there were a lot of international students. So you've got kids who are there, literally cut off from their parents, from everything else they know. Sometimes their first day at school was their first day in the United Kingdom. And that's quite interesting to think about. They're maybe not even speaking in their native language. So you've got all of that going on. Nicky Campbell, I'm new to the story of Nicky Campbell. It's interesting to bear in mind he only saw fit to start speaking about it or found the courage to. We don't know what the reason is, but I think it was at the age of 59 when he decided that he could talk about this publicly. I have the greatest amount of respect for him for doing so. But just on private schools, and in particular those types of boarding schools, those schools, when you talk about the pleasure pain and I don't know, they are slightly better placed to control any sort of to control their own environment. Obviously, the people who go to those schools are very intertwined with various aspects of the UK establishment, whether it's judiciary or the political class. They run them. You know, the people who are perhaps involved in those situations when they were kids are probably, as you were saying, Carlton, bound in some way to keep a lid on things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you also, Sean, because you touched on it there. Yes, you've got the parents bound to and the old school boys or girls in your case, Firgas, bound to keep a lid on it because it's positive for the system. But is there a negative, and I thought of this when you said about Nicky Campbell, is there a negative backlash? So wouldn't Nicky Campbell be looked on as some type of traitor for speaking, excuse the pun, out of school?
I think, do you know what? I'm just going to interject quickly because I do want to hear Sean's opinion as well. But I think Sean's sort of hit the nail on the head with the fact that it took him until he was 59 to come out with that. I mean, to talk about the Charles Spencer one, he's in his late 50s as well, or of a similar age. There was a documentary years ago, like ITV did it, and obviously we all like, because ITV solve crimes now. But there was a Freedom of Information Act, and they sort of subpoenaed lots of essentially they kind of looked at the bigger picture, and they said that and I think the conclusion was that there was evidence, conclusive / reported evidence of sexual abuse in 75% of public schools. So if you think about the fact that there are imagine how many people, men, women, or whatever, who are now, who can only have that conversation, who only feel like they can find their voice in their late 50s, and how has that affected the 40 odd years since it happened?
I need to dig into you. Fergus, because you went to a very famous public school. And
yeah, I went to Carlton, and to be honest, if I mean, I think it's a real truism to say that if anything happened, the school covered it up, or the parent covered it up. So
yeah, but the bigger question, Fergus, the bigger question, this is what I want to put to you and also to Sean. The bigger question is, had you so much? What's the word? Loyalty. Let's use that word loyalty, because I'm putting the pun with loyalty, with royalty. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't do that. For those who don't know, a lot of royalty went there as well. But a lot of loyalty, would that affect you thinking of coming forward and saying something? That is what I want to put to both of you guys who went to the public schools. Well, do you know what? One of the things that Nicky Campbell has been very vocal about is, he said that he was worried about. He full well knew that his parents were paying a lot of money. He's adopted, isn't he, Nicky Campbell? Yes, he is.
And he said that he knew that his parents were working really hard and paying a lot of money for him to have this privilege of this education. So it was a case of, he felt that it would have been a disloyalty, but I guess not disloyalty to the school, just sort of letting his parents down, I suppose.
Right.
I'd have to agree with that. I think I certainly felt that when I had difficult times in my first year. As I mentioned before, you're reminded of all these people around you who've, despite whatever they were going through, they were able to make a success of themselves. So why can't you?
Yes.
But at the same time, loyalty. You are, you're not stupid when you're 13. You do understand it's a privileged thing to be in a boarding school. So you are aware of the sacrifice that's been made by your parents. And when you first get on the phone from a payphone, a BT payphone, and say, I'm not having a good time here, Mum. It's the first reaction to that is, okay, what's wrong? But obviously, like in any difficult situation, as part of growing up, you are encouraged. Well, stick at it, see how it goes. We can, if you really don't like it there, let's see what we can do about it. So certainly, my experience, I felt my parents dealt well with that, but I did feel like there was a subtext there. We've sacrificed a lot to get you here. I felt guilt, actually.
And did you also feel, Sean, and again, Fergus, did you also feel that let me stay with this, regardless of what happens, and in your case is nothing, but let me stay with this because in the end, I will be successful.
Yes, I trusted my parents, and that was 100% their opinion that this was the right decision for me. You have to remember, I think it's like 1% or something like that of the country goes to boarding school. I'm not sure that low, but
particularly to private, to the public school system, because we spoke about the lowest version thereof, which is not. For orphans or whatever else, or people in care, they also go, but it's not a proper boarding school, is it? It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
To your advantage, absolutely. And the reason why I mention this again is because, I'll tell you two stories very quickly, and then I'll come back to you guys, you two guys. And then I want to come in with Dr. Rachel because she can understand, from my perspective, the normal working class person. Now,
how do you keep on saying this? But I went to a private school in the north.
Rachel, no, right, okay, three of you, right? So three of you private school.
Yeah, I didn't go to a public school. I went to the northern version, which is called a private school.
Private school. So okay, so you're a day person going to a private school. Yeah. Right. Okay. So no problems. Well, I'm by myself. So, but I can remember being in the Secret Intelligence Service, and I was a case officer, which is basically the I guess the top quarter of the organisation, and I'm like the only working class guy doing this role that I knew of, I can remember one guy, great guy. And they're great people, don't get me wrong. And he'd recently been married, and then he said, "Right, we've done it. We've done it. We've got his name down. He'll be going to Eton, yeah." And it was perceived as absolutely fantastic. We'll be going to Eton. Now I don't know how it works. You may be able to tell me, you guys who's been there, but this chap hadn't even had a child. So I don't know what strings have been pulled, what was going on, but that was what was said. I mean, I wasn't in that club, so I didn't know how it worked. So I thought to myself, right, so this is the pinnacle, to get your child into the school, even before they're born. Because the success rate, as you know, I mean, it was Macmillan was famous for saying, I don't trust anybody if they haven't been playing the wall game. And the wall game's only played in Eton. So his cabinet was full of people who played the wall game. So you had to have been to Eton actually to even be in his cabinet. I know that's like the 50s. But the point I'm making is quite clear with that. It's basically saying, for life, you are good to go.
Well, it's you're part of the in-group. That's what it is. As human beings, we'll want to be around people who understand us, who know us and know what we've been through. And it's very much that is a group which, does get on. And you think about the cost benefit analysis, and there's cost to it, both financial, having to stay away, and obviously everything that happens within the school. But the benefit is, in the UK, you go to one of those schools and 99% are going to be really, really successful.
Yeah. And that's all I was getting at with because practically all of these case officers had been to Eton or Harrow or somewhere like that. Practically all of them, to be fair. So it was clear to me that and for want of a better role, that's kind of the James Bond role, if you will, the case officer. So it was clear to me that was your success. Don't get me wrong, they were bright people. I'm not because what I would say is it obviously provides an education that is very, very good. Very, very good.
So, Carlton, I'm going to slightly change tack.
Can I just ask Sean just to come through on that? Because absolutely. Is he happy that the education was second to none for him?
Yeah. How can I answer that one? The school I went to, it didn't pride itself actually on being the most academic, and it really wasn't at the time. Had some catching up to do. It was really, I think the way it described its merits were that it creates gentlemen out of us, or something like that. I can't exactly. But
did it create a gentleman out of us?
Was this in 1840?
No, I agree. It sounds, I don't know, antediluvian. But it was mental actually. But I think that I went from a high performing private day school to a mid to high performing private boarding school, and I felt it. I was suddenly top of the class for a couple of things. However, of course, it was still a good education. It has done me some favors. I would say that I haven't really used it. I haven't used that privilege in the way that I could have, mainly because I didn't go into the types of the field that you're in, Carlton, or other such. I didn't, become a barrister. I didn't run for public office. So I'm not sure it's helped me in that way. I genuinely entered the rat race. So that was a funny one, and I became the posh guy in many of the offices that I worked in. So I'm not sure I used it in the way that I was supposed to use it. I don't want to think about how much my parents spent on it.
Well, maybe it got you through the paper vetting, the sifting. So your parents might have done well when you put your application in and it said what it said. That might have done it.
I'll tell you something for nothing, right? At Gornston, right, a lot of the masters, a lot of the tutors and masters were ex-Oxford, right, or ex-Oxbridge, right, but they'd retired, right, and so I mean, like, I don't think, like, I mean, it's different now, but in those days, I don't think Gornston had even heard of the national curriculum. They were just like, oh, let's just let's just march around the cricket pitch and spout Latin, right?
That's still the same now, though, isn't it, Fergus? They don't have to be qualified. The teachers who teach at private and public schools don't have to be qualified.
And so I had this brilliant, ruse because I was actually the only person who took ancient Greek at A level, but I took it because the teacher so it's basically just me and this doddery old man in this room, right? I know in the context of what we've just said that sounds terrible, but basically this guy would just sit there and have a nap, right? And so it was brilliant because I just did absolutely zilch. It was but
you passed.
Oh yeah, because if you think about it, GCSEs and A levels are graded on a curve, right? So if you think about it, if you pick something really obscure, right, well, you're going to get a higher grade just by virtue of showing up, right? Anyway,
something you and I have in common, Fergus. I too did ancient Greek A level.
Well, brilliant!
Amazing. There you go. Every day's a school day. Every day's a learning experience on this podcast. I was going to say though, I'm watching this BBC show, TV show called Borders, right, which is a comedy. It's supposed to be a comedy. It's very dark comedy, right, but it's funny, but it is quite disturbing. But it's actually, I mean, there are so many truisms in it. The preface, like the premise of the series, and it is a series, is that there's this fictional public school where one of the kids has posted a video, and we all know that this is a sort of Boris reference, right? But it's posted a video of them picking on a homeless person and then peeing on them and setting them on fire or something like that, right? And so this viral video sort of obviously brings down the school reputation. So the school then decides to give a scholarship to black teenagers from an estate, and so these black teenagers kind of come and infiltrate, and it's kind of funny in a way, right? There's an episode where this same perpetrator attacks one of the scholarship kids, pins him down in the toilets, again pees on him, humiliates him, and films it all and shares it on social media. But then the black guy calls his gang mates and sort of says, right, actually, come on, let's take this guy, and actually what's quite interesting is that they pretend to pour petrol on him, but it just to scare him. It's not, it's just water, but this guy's sort of having a meltdown, and then they in return retaliate by filming it and sharing it on social media. So my point is that we've obviously unpicked to a certain extent teacher / pastoral care abuse for children in these situations, but let's not forget the peer abuse.
Fantastic.
And the peer abuse in these kind of environments obviously does exist, but as we know, peer abuse exists everywhere. And Carlton, you well know, because of some of the high profile murder cases that you've worked on, that this is a thing. So circling back to what we said at the start of this, this isn't a, whilst it's a polarized conversation in public schools, that there really is no difference between a teenage gang abusing a child or a public school gang abusing a child.
I think there's a big difference. And I think the big difference is, that if you're talking about the public, no, let's get that right. If you're referring to the fact that a public school gang of students carrying out an action against individuals, or a gang of normal school kids carrying out that, then there is little difference, other than, and this is the point I'm making, other than I'm suggesting that the public school lot believe that they can get away with it. So you've mentioned Boris Johnson. Well, the Bullingdon group, we know what they were doing, but there was never going to be any comeback to them. And I'll give you, as I said, I never pretend that I was on the streets forever and a day. I wasn't. You have to do 2 years. When I first joined the Met, you have to do 2 years on this as a PC, a uniformed police constable running the street. So I did that, and I'll never forget when it's Freshers' Week, the inspector would stand up and say, and generally the inspector doesn't do a lot of talking to the troops. It's done by the sergeant generally, but the inspector would come in and say, right, this is Freshers' Week, and this is in an area of Rochester Row. Okay, so it's relatively affluent area, Pimlico, blah blah blah. But there's also some rougher places as well in those days, not now. You say, right, Freshers' Week coming up, and there will be hijinks from some of our people, and they may throw a bottle or two around or whatever. Take it as it is. Don't be over the top with your actions. Right? Now, I tell you now, if the normal people of that area or any other estate were throwing bottles around, they'd be getting arrested, criminal damage, whatever. Right? But because it was the certain class, it's just hijinks. Do you see what I'm saying? So the whole society falls in behind this. That's where the problem is It's a little bit different. And when, of course, the teachers are doing it, or the mistresses are doing it, then there's a different perspective as well. Now, I want to finish this week's episode with Sean just sort of explaining how he felt, and you as well, Fergus, how you felt. In fact, all of you, because you've all been there, how you felt when you actually got in to the school. When it was said to you, you're in, this is what we want of you. If you could just give me an idea of how you guys felt. And next week, because there's clearly got to be a part 2 of this, because it's such a widespread topic, we'll come back with some other issues. And I think we'll look more closely, Dr. Rachel, at how the brain works with this. And then we can work that through. But for this week, I'd like to end on it might be the feeling of glory, the feeling of euphoria that you got when they said you're in and we're taking you there. Then the little bit of a crash that, I won't be able to see you, Mum and Dad. I mean, how did that work?
I'll go first. I was sold on it when I was told that it was like basically a 24-hour everyday sleepover with your mates. And you tell any teenager that, or young teenager, and that sounds exciting. So excitement, I suppose, was the first thing I felt. I didn't really care too much about not seeing my parents. I wasn't aware of the deep psychological issues that may affect a kid who's away from their caregivers for such a long period. But I was, I thought, it's my parents, whatever. When they leave the house, you get excited when you're 12. Finally, time, So, no, I felt excitement. That was my, my
Super. Fergus?
Well, I went to boarding school under slightly more unusual circumstances because my dad had just died. So really, my mum just wanted to sort of, park the problem a little bit. So I went with my brother, and I was quite happy to be there with my brother and, sort of decompress with my brother and all the rest of it, and kind of leave my mum to kind of get over, to sort of grieve and deal with her life and decide what she wanted to do and stuff like that. And also, I mean, she was adamant that she didn't want to be in the house and wanted to sell the house, so we would have had to move anyway. So it was more like a sort of break clause to give her some space. Mm-hmm. I actually, like, as opposed to my brother, who's very academic, I was just really sporty. And when I saw the hockey pitches and the tennis courts and the and the swimming pool and all of those sorts of things, it was quite exciting. I hadn't lined myself up for actually how freezing and uncomfortable and hungry I would probably end up being. But I mean, that was the kind of line of thinking. So that's how it went, really. I mean, my mum specifically chose Gornston because she was very into the outward bound side of it. I mean, that's a whole other narrative because Gornston would define outward bound, taking you to a Hebridean island, leaving you with some ex-RAF ration sachets from, that went out of date 20 years ago and a bin bag to sleep in. But that's a whole other story.
We might touch on that in part 2.
They talk about it being character building. I think my mum kind of was quite sold into the character building element. So I don't know. I think I was slightly ambivalent, but I sort of saw it as a new adventure.
And Dr. Rachel?
Well, mine was slightly different to the other two because I had to pass an exam to go, and I took the exam a couple of years early. So the pressure was, I went under the the auspices that I was really smart, so I had to cut the mustard academically. But really strangely, my home life, my childhood home life was so abusive and so chaotic. I used to literally yearn to go to boarding school, which might have been, retrospectively, it might have been a little bit like, going from the jumping from the frying pan into the fire. But yeah, it was completely different for me, is that I was under no illusion that I had to go and I had to work hard because that's why I was going.
Right.
So, and yeah, it was a day school, but it was a very academic school, and you were under no illusions that if you didn't cut the mustard, you were out.
Right. So was this fee paying, or did you get a scholarship then?
No, it was initially fee paying, and then my dad stopped paying the fees to punish the whole families. But because I was, luckily because I was clever, they actually allowed me to stay in an assisted place, because it was before assisted places actually got banished. But I come from a working class family. I'm not an elite. I'm not from the upper echelons at all. But I rubbed shoulders with people who were very much sort of seen as the elite of the area that I came from. But like I say, I used to be one of my greatest wishes when I was a child to actually escape from the madness, and because I seek solace in education, which is why I'm so upset at where education has gone now, because it's always been my safe place, and it's no longer a safe place for any child.
Mm-hmm. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. This fantastic debate, we can only really say, because that's where we've got to, is going to continue next week. Hopefully you'll tune in. So it's goodbye from me for today. Rachel?
Yeah, it's good night. Good night. It's not good night. It's goodbye from me. God, I was wondering one of the two Ronnies then.
That's the one. Sean?
To sleep. Yeah, it's good night from me as well.
Good night. And
I'm gonna join in the good night fun, but as a parent of four, I'm sort of doing that like Teletubby wave thing, like.
We may have to film this one of these days.
It's just conditioning.
Yeah, the listeners should come back to us with suggestions as to whether we should film it or not, so we can see your Teletubby wave when it comes through. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you again next week.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
More than a quarter of a century, I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.